Straight Talk Live.
Off. Should we get started?
Let's go. Let's crack on. It's a beautiful day in London.
It's also a beautiful day here in San Diego.
They buy things to impress people that they don't even like.
You do have to change the culture. The culture in the organization is the most important.
It's as if reality is splintering into multiple shards.
Welcome back to Straight Talk Live. My name is Rick Snyder. I'm one of the co-hosts of this fantastic not-for-profit show where we get to explore the depths of human, digital, and social transformation. We're back from a 2-week summer holiday break and revitalized, reset, rejuvenated, and very excited about starting that new, fresh season with one of our favorite return guests, Nolan Bushnell, who we'll introduce in a moment. But before, I want to get to our amazing co-host who helped hatch this idea from the very beginning when COVID hit, and we decided that we were not satisfied by the conversations happening around the world. And that is my friend and co-host, Af Malhotra. Af, take it away.
Thank you, Rick. Welcome to Straight Talk Live after a nice, relaxing summer break for many of us. Delighted to kick off the first episode in September with an icon and a legend, no doubt, who we've had on the show before. Today's conversation is going to be about something that is pertinent to all of us now and in the future. And it really defines how we're going to evolve and transform ourselves as humanity goes. And it's to do with education. It's to do with how we learn, what we learn, who we learn from. And when we had an episode with Nolan many weeks back now, he talked about this concept of passive learning. And I won't dwell on the point now. I'm sure he has a lot to say. But it's enchanted us and it connected with us. And so we're very excited to have Nolan on the show again. I'm going to throw the ball back to Rick to introduce Nolan formally. And off we go on this escapade again. So let's kick off.
Yeah, so everyone I think probably knows Nolan in our community. And in case you don't, if you've been under a rock the last 50 years of your life, Nolan has been on the cutting edge of so many technologies and really defining my whole childhood of the 80s. I mean, when you have Chuck E. Cheese pizza and you have Atari video gaming, you're in heaven. That was my whole 80s. And so Nolan, thank you from the bottom of my heart for so many joyous years for me and all my friends in that era. But also you've stayed on the cutting edge of innovation ever since. And you've always been listening for, where do I feel, my passion leading me toward? And what are areas where I feel like I can make a contribution? And so you've been, starting over 20 ventures or so, doing incredible work. And I'm really excited to dive deep into your adventure today around LearnUp, which is around education and technology, AI, and really forwarding the educational space and helping that actually be more effective than it is today. So Nolan, welcome back to Straight Talk Live.
My pleasure being here, and I'm glad to be able to talk about my passion. It's actually been almost a 30-year passion that I've been working and researching this. And a lot of people think of me as a businessman. I think of myself as a scientist. So I like to deep dive on things and try to really understand on a fundamental scientific level of what the hell's going on. And I'm particularly attracted to areas where the science and the reality are disconnected. And today's education, compared to what we know about learning, is about as bad as you can get. It is just fundamentally dysfunctional. It's inefficient. It brings out the worst in people. And I think I can fix it.
So that's exactly, you just read my mind, intuited what I was going to ask. Let's start there first. Is obviously you've been attracted to the educational space where you say, 30 years plus. I think you have 8 children. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yes, if I remember that last time. You have 8 children. So obviously this has been near and dear as you've seen your children go through the years of education, all phases, and you've seen what works, what doesn't work, and many different iterations of that. So walk us back first through what do you feel like is broken with the educational system today? What's not working? Why has this drawn your attention?
Well, a lot of times what happens is that new technology provides opportunities that weren't available before. And so, for example, in the early days of education, it was a thing where there was one book. And so the teacher, the professor, would read the book to the class, to the assembled masses. And it was because of scarcity, scarcity of resources. And so what happened, we got locked into this one-to-many mindset in which we were classifying and grouping students as opposed to treating them as individuals. And the test, I say, in today's world is no grades and no grades. No grades imply, if you're in a grade, that implies you're being batch processed. That's wrong. No grade, A, B, C, D, means that you can still get by only knowing a portion of the material. And learning tends to be additive. And so if you get C's on arithmetic 1, 2, 3, 4, the wheels come off by the time you want to get algebra, because you really don't understand fractions. You don't really understand decimals. You don't really understand the underpinnings. So I guess the areas that I started this journey really as a curious about how do we learn. And sometimes you start with a single question: how do we learn? And it turned out that none of that information came out of the education departments. Like, there's thousands and thousands of PhDs of education. And I feel like, why is there no curiosity about that? I mean, that's the fundamental underpinnings of what education should be. But there's reams and reams of information over in the psychology department and the physiology department. And so, but it's just somehow it's all about process on the education side, not about understanding the deep roots. But what I've discovered is that there is a huge number of things that we can do that really make learning more efficient and better. And the first one is active. The point of cognition tends to be around active learning, when you actually think about something and make a decision. And so the Socratic method of questioning and question and answer is actually, it appears to be the most important one. And we learned a lot of about that with video games. And there's this thing called the flow state. And the flow state is really an idea in a paper and a book written by a guy named Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, who was a professor at MIT, Hungarian. That's why you can't say his name, because, the Hungarians, the
purposely make it difficult.
Yeah, well, no, it was the Italians. The Italians, stole all their vowels. And so when you have, anyway, so what we want to do is have kids challenge. And when I say kids, I should say lifelong learners, because we should we should be learning every day of our life until we finally are buried. Um, and so that balance between just hard enough and just easy enough is the flow state. And if you achieve that in video games, people will play for hours and it seems like minutes. Mm-hmm. And that's what we want to do in education. Learn It is employing all these principles into a subscription-based learning platform that will be available, I think, probably the end of this month. We're going to have our first system. Mm-hmm. We also have a mentoring program that we will be able to do one-on-one or one-on-two kind of mentoring to really have an individualized experience. This is all online and remotely. I mean, what better way to learn German than to be mentored by a German girl who's about your same age, or boy, and I think that this resonance is kind of important. We're also playing around with some things in terms of resonance. So, for example, if Kobe Bryant or Madonna teach you physics, is it stickier? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that we can synthesize celebrities, stars, athletes, mm-hmm. and have them become mentors, teachers, what have you. So those are some of the things that we're playing with. But the other very important point that people can start to integrate into their lives right now is, before you start to learn anything, you should exercise aggressively for about 20 minutes and get your heart rate up to 80%. Mm-hmm. Turns out that is a very, very important precursor to learning, because the exercise causes your brain to secrete BDNF. It's called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Mm-hmm. And that is a protein that's a precursor to dendrite formation. So the theory is that you're putting a little bit of what you're learning into hardware, not just software.
I like it.
And it's good stuff.
You make a really good point that with education, even though I think they're doing the best they can with trying to figure out how to help learners, get the most out of, different programs, you don't really hear as much about the science of learning on the education side. At least I don't. I'm not exposed to that as much. So I really like this distinction of, like, let's really get into the science of how do we learn best? How do we discover flow states? How do we do things like exercise or ways to prepare the learner to get the most out of the experience? And that's really what you're looking at more and more.
Not just that. Think of what is actually going on. And there was a study done by a group of students at a New York university, I forget which one, and they basically shadowed high school students trying to figure out, and it was a particular school that had a very high dropout rate. Mm-hmm. It's high school. And they were asking the question, why are kids dropping out of school? And they came back and sort of wrote the report up for their thing. They couldn't understand why the dropout rate was so low, because the day-to-day operation was horrible. And an awful lot of it had to do with boredom. Mm-hmm. That high school kids are unruly. Junior high school kids are unruly. Disrupting a classroom is cool. You get street cred for being the biggest jerk in a classroom. Well, so the poor teacher, they can't teach, the one-to-many classroom. when there's disruption going on. And for the people who are not disrupting, who are just sitting there, it's really boring.
Right.
There's nothing going on. And so I visited a classroom in Las Vegas, Nevada, that had 100 kids. It was the quietest, most well-defined classroom I've ever been in. It looked more like a tech startup. Everybody had their computer screen. Everybody had their headphones on. The teacher, if she wanted to talk to the kids, could push a button and it would be put into everybody's earphones. I was there to give a speech. They had a section off to the side. It was like a little amphitheater with a projection screen, and the 100 kids can go sit there and have a lecture. But it was not their normal environment. And what it showed to me was the power of having this one-to-one technology. They were using some of the software that I was creating at the time. It was quasi-game software. But it's really important to understand methodology. In the early days of computers, companies would say, we need to computerize our systems. If they sort of parachuted computers in, it didn't work as well as they'd hoped. But if they totally redesigned their workflow around computers, it worked great. That's really what needs to happen in education. Is right now computers are kind of parachuted in. They're not really part of the mainstream construct of what's going on. And what I'm doing with LearnUp is I'm really defining what school is all about. And in fact, we will be not just providing subscription software. We're going to be building schools. We've got a system figured out where, as you know, Chuck E. Cheese was a franchise. What do you think about a LearnUp franchise school? Where, what does a franchise really do? A franchise has a business model and a guarantee of standards of some sort. And we believe that we can create a franchise in which an individual teacher can choose to get a bunch of parents together, take a franchise, start a storefront school. The parents, I think we can pull a really good education off for less than $5,000 a year. That's like $100 a week for a first-class private education. You know, and you say, $500 a week, how's that doable? Well, let me tell you the converse. If you do a shop floor analysis of California, LA Unified, the average classroom is 33 kids. Let's just say 30. The average payment from the state to that classroom is $10,000 a kid. So there's $300,000 a year being spent on that classroom. Janitorial, heat, lights, what have you, maybe $20,000. The real estate is a whole different thing because that's paid for by bond issues, and so that's not a real-time function. The average teacher salary is $65,000 a year, including contribution to pension and all that stuff. Okay. So maximum, we just spent $100,000. What happened to the other $200,000?
That's a good question. Nolan, what happened to that $200,000?
It's a miracle. No. Well, there's a building in downtown Los Angeles, about 1 million square feet. The LA Unified, no teachers, no students. What's in that 1 million square feet? And that's the other $200,000 is in that other building.
So Nolan, I have a question. So let's go back to Learn It for a second. So the problem that you've defined is a real problem, and it's a systemic problem that we all are aware of, and many have talked about over the course of the last 15 or 20 years. Books have been written and so on and so forth. Education systems, unfortunately, or the civil servants or the politicians haven't yet sort of clocked it, and therefore there's been no change. There's really been no innovation and transformation across, I think, global education systems. A little bit of technology here, a few laptops there, a couple of subscriptions here and there, mostly accentuated by the COVID debacle over the last 2 years. But I think prior to that, it's been a dire situation. I think every parent and every teacher is deeply frustrated. So you are preaching to the converted, actually. Now, the question with Learn It then is, talk us through the detail of the use case. So who am I using your solution? And imagine an A/B test environment. I am with Learn It today, or compared to someone who doesn't have Learn It. What happens in the course of whatever time period, a year, 3 years, 5 years? How am I different?
Okay. Right now, I think the best piece of educational software out there right now is actually Minecraft. And it's, you may not look at it immediately and say this is a piece of learning software, but it kind of is. One of my sons probably learned more about world history through a game that was put out by Microsoft in the 90s called Civilization, and there were several of these. Learn It has a synthetic world, and the student is an avatar, which is exploring that world. And the exploration of the world does reveals, but also the resources that the avatar needs. Needs food, needs water, needs transportation, has to earn that. And so we have a series of mini games, some of which are just straight on learning, what have you. But there's this thing called adaptive practice, where you are not told something, you are presented a problem. And you have to answer it within 5 seconds. And so, but you're not presented anything. So how do you expect them to know? Well, you're not. But what you have to do is turn on your brain and say, I don't have a clue what this is, but what's the best answer I can come up with? Sometimes it's multiple choice, sometimes it's true, false, what have you. And it turns out that what you're doing with your mind when you're saying, what's the best answer? That's actually kind of sticky.
Yeah.
And so you are sometimes right, sometimes wrong. When you are wrong, it moves on. And in 3 or 4 lessons, you'll be asked again. Now you get a chance to get it right. And you say, I remember I was wrong last time. Now I'm going to get it right. And so there's this sort of balancing, this feedback mechanism. let me tell you, this was right now, LearnUp is being launched because the time is right. I found out that my successes have been because I got the timing right, and my failures have been because I've got my timing wrong. I had a company called BrainRush that did some amazing tech, but I could not get subscriptions sufficiently to make it a viable entity. The world wasn't ready for it yet. But more than that, I thought I could sell it into the school systems. And I was able to get one school system to buy into it, and they were getting all ready to go. And there was a school board election. Teachers union packed the school board, canceled the whole thing. They were afraid of it. The teachers unions didn't want to have anything to do with it. And so I realized you can't fight City Hall at that point in time. So fast forward, COVID, it was, the right time. I said, I got to do this. I know too much. I got it wrong. Now I got a chance to get it right. It's the same metric.
And so a lot of what your ecosystem is relying on is the notion of, this avatar world that, just like in video gaming, there's a synthetic world created, and the kids see it as more engaging, more fun, not just like learning, regurgitating information that you're hearing and memorizing, spitting it back out, but they're actually engaging with the material. And is there a gamification element that you're finding encourages the learner as well?
Massively.
Massively.
And there's a few more tricks that we have up our sleeve. You not only get score, but you get rewards. And we are going to be able to give cryptocurrency to kids.
Now, Af and I want to sign up for this class.
People, and we're going to have a mechanism for which parents, if they want to incentivize their kids, instead of giving them allowance, they can put the allowance on the LearnIt platform, and the kids earn it by doing well. And remember, so many of the things that kids want to buy now are online.
True.
And so, that bridge between I've got no credit card, how do I buy something online, is hard. Now we can have the parents. I mean, the last thing a parent wants to do is give the kids a credit card. That's fraught with peril. And but giving them an allowance in online ability to buy is really cool. And I believe in time we're going to get some sponsors that will pay kids to learn and maybe see their logo here and there, like Nike or what have you. And so I believe that we can create a secondary ecosystem for kids and rewards. So that's one area. But I want to tell you a story that happened with BrainRush. I got off track a little bit. One of the things that our software did at BrainRush, and LearnUp will too, was teach vocabulary for learning, or for a language. And we had a series of schools in Philadelphia that used our software in their Spanish 1, but not all the classes. I think one particular high school had 4 Spanish 1 classes, and 2 of them used our software just 3 days a week, and the other 2 did not. When it came time for Spanish 2, they could not mix our kids with the kids that didn't have our software, because our kids had a working vocabulary of over 2,000 words. The kids that didn't use our software had a working vocabulary less than 150 words. So they couldn't mix them. The kids that used our software, they could go in Spanish too, and the total class was conducted in Spanish. You know.
So that's your A/B test example. When did you set up, or when was the Brain Rush idea? What year was that?
It's 1916 or 2016.
2016.
Yeah, 2016. So yeah, you are right. Timing is everything. So just walk us through one more example. So many of us are familiar with Minecraft and Roblox and all of these other cool sort of gaming systems that are out there. Is this just for young people? And so is this about the next generation, or can people who are our age go onto this platform to learn more advanced things? I guess I'm talking a few years down the line. Maybe you have a vision for where this is going to end up.
We will have a full suite of items for lifelong learning, including plumbing and being an electrician and being, doing things like setting up a router, and we think that everything can be taught more efficiently. And the core is a module. And what you want sometimes is we're going to have curated playlists. And so, for example, you may, in order to fully set up a router, you need to understand a little bit of radio frequency propagation theory. So that's a physics course. And if you're going to be a world-class chef, you probably need to know a little bit about physics. You need to know a little bit about thermodynamics. And so the playlist would include those modules. And if you're a chef, you don't need to be a PhD in thermodynamics, but you need to have a first level understanding of calories and heat transfer and specific heat of various items. You need to know, that as altitude goes up, boiling points drop, things like that. So that I believe that we can create people who are not only better at their profession, but have a deeper understanding.
Yeah.
People, there are people who have a job and they're what I call recipe players. They've learned a recipe and they can execute it, but they're totally, because their recipe, anytime that it's off script, there's something that's slightly different. Because they don't have the underpinnings, they're lost. And I believe that a good education gives you those underpinnings as well.
Are you saying the teacher is a human in avatar form in this ecosystem, or is it like AI or a combination of using different technologies? What's that looking like?
The answer is yes and yes. I mean, the teacher is really a mentor. What the teacher, what you want in any system is the main flow and then the exception mediation. The teacher should be an exception mediator. And so, for example, let's say that we go into a class in which there are 300 kids. And I'm not going to say they're high school kids, but because we don't group kids in my world. And so what we find is the kids start to work on various modules. And some of them are very fast at it. Some of them are somewhat slower. We don't care how fast you are. In fact, it's really unfortunate that the euphemism for being stupid is, well, he's a little slow.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know? Some people are just wired at different speeds. And quite candidly, we really don't care, because the difference we're talking about in terms of organized tests is 3%, 5%, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Should that determine the future of somebody's life? I don't think so, you know? And anyway, so what we want to do is, when somebody is absolutely struggling and hit a wall, or being a little lazy, you know, they haven't had a right answer for the last 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's time for human intervention, because that, all of a sudden, they're an outlier. And so we can have the software alert the mentor, I'm not going to call him a teacher anymore, the mentor, that it'd be nice to just ping in and say, "Hey, George, what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
Have a late night last night? Are you sleeping right now?" And it doesn't have to happen very often, but it's helpful that they know that there's just a little bit of a forcing function out there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you see, that's quite fascinating. So do you see, if you think about the supply chain of this, I guess there's a lot of content that needs to be created at some point by something or someone in whatever form factor. So how do you see that playing out? Do you have, the traditional model of some of the apps that are out there today that are better than the baseline, when you have apps like Masterclass and various others where they've got this higher quality Apple standard content, and you've got a Nolan Bushnell teaching you entrepreneurship, and it looks great and the lighting's great, and you've got 9 modules and you pay $99 a year and you get loads of others. That's, again, to your point, is passive, I would imagine, because it's just a video talking about experiences, informative, no doubt. What is the form factor here? Is it just the games, like you're involved in like a Minecraft environment and different sort of situations and cities and towns? And just help us understand that a little bit.
Okay, think of one of the great pieces of software that was sort of world changing was Doom. And and it was because it had this wonderful authoring tool where, for the first time, people with no computer skills could create a level.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we want to do. We're creating these editing tools, and we have defined about 11 modules. Each have a different area of Bloom's taxonomy. And Bloom, for your listeners who don't know, categorized how the brain thinks and looks, and like at the lowest level, acquisition of data.
Mm-hmm.
Just how do we name things? We've got a pencil. What's its name? What? Here's a color. What's its name? Real simple stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's another level, which is attributes. What are the adjectives and or the adverbs?
Mm-hmm.
Then there's a thing called sets, where what are these things? What belongs? What are the? How do we group these things appropriately?
Right.
And then we have an area called sequences. What is the proper order for things? It's very important for math, and these are high abstract things that are kind of important. And so we publish these constructs, and what you put in them, it's very easy for a teacher to do that. For example, one of the things is to, like an illustrated dictionary,
Mm-hmm.
like a map of the world. And now you click on Botswana, or no, it says Botswana. You have to click on it. Where's Botswana? I actually don't know where that is, but it's somewhere. And so that's a template, but you not only can put in the world map, you can put in the human body and click on the femur or the tibia or what have you. And so, this link between the visual and the word. And then, there's one of the things that kids have a real problem with is there's what they call the third grade drop off. The third grade, most kids can kind of learn how to read by the third grade. But they're reading words. But about half the kids fall off the reservation by the fourth grade because they can read, but they don't understand. And so how do we get this understanding? And there's a lot of debate. Why don't they understand? They have insufficient life experiences, so there's no metaphors going on. Do they not have the vocabulary appropriate to turn the words into understanding? How can we remediate these things? And we've got a couple of PhDs that think that they can build some modules around getting rid of they call it the third grade cliff.
Right.
And think about how powerful that could be. If we can solve that, all of a sudden there's a big swath of the population that are basically disenfranchised from education from the fourth grade on. Get them back into the mainstream. All of a sudden you're good, because almost 100% of the dropouts have this learning disability. I mean, it's not really a disability per se, but it's a
there's like a gap in comprehension that you're closing that gap. And how as far as product readiness, how ready is this right now to be fully rolled out, distributed, et cetera? Where is that at in the conversation?
We will have a minimum viable product the end of this month.
Okay.
But we've got such a huge vision that I look at it and it's maybe 1% done.
Totally can get that.
But one of the things that I want to plug, you can go into learnup.com right now and sign up, and we'll send you a chapter of the book that we're going to be publishing at the same time.
Oh, cool.
Great. Wow.
And it's a book called Learn It, School of the Future.
That's cool. I have a quick, sorry, go for it.
Go ahead. And I don't think that a company has ever been launched simultaneously with a book, which is the manifesto.
Yeah, that's cool. That's a very cool idea.
Yeah.
I have a question that's related somehow. It's just more actually around bias in education. So like when I went, through school, there's a history book. Like here's the book of what went down in the Roman Empire, or here's what happened in World War II from a certain perspective.
Yeah.
And so how do you tackle that? There's so much bias depending on, who wins the wars, who gets to tell the story, and how our perspective changes over time. And we get to realize, there's alternative, stories to what really happened, or what even in science and other fields as well. There's other perspectives of what's going on. How do you tackle that? And does your technology or your ecosystems, how do you contend with bias in education?
I basically shoot everybody that disagrees with me.
So just like everyone else in the past, that part's the same. That's good.
What you just described is one of the problems of the world. And actually, I was having a good conversation with your friend in AI. And and there's right now, there used to be a concept of the truth, that it was immutable, it was there, it was understandable, you could find it. I believe that less today. I believe that there is your truth and my truth, and I think that's wrong. I think that there has to be an immutable truth out there somewhere. But who's the arbiter?
Right.
You know? And so we were talking about an AI construct in which we have a proposition and we ask the AI, is this true? And then we go through and we look at everybody that has opined to the truthfulness or the falseness of this concept. And then we weight them based on how often they've been correct in the past. So there's a veracity score that each opinion has. And I think we can't get to the truth of facts, but we can have a highly curated consensus
through AI technology specifically.
Yeah.
I think it gets complex when you have qualitative subjects. I mean, history is a good example, philosophy. I mean, just a great example is there's another group that I'm part of where we're discussing philosophers and different ways of thinking. And of course, many of the people we're referring to are usually of a certain demographic, white men. And so I happen to also come from another part of the world, and I'm aware of philosophers in India, for example, but have had no press ever because they just didn't have the go-to-market strategy, I guess, whatever the story may be. But I'm discovering that whole side of philosophy, but I actually didn't even know it existed because mainstream teachings never really brought those individuals to the forefront. For whatever reason, and back to what Rick was saying, I think what's going to be monumental, and again, LearnUp is going to be phenomenal. I think a lot of this also, Nolan, is because of your history, because of who you are. I mean, founders create companies, whether we like it or not. AI doesn't, thankfully. Founders, a human brain has to conceptualize and think in the way that you have with your wider team to come up with what you've come up with today. Including the mistakes that you've made. I mean, wouldn't it be horrible if we made no mistakes with AI? I mean, it was just constantly, we always got it right. How boring would life be? Exactly. So there'd be no stories to tell, frankly. It'd just be, everything would be perfect. So, I've got
to tell you, I got to tell you a story.
Please.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but
no, please do.
It turns out that Steve Jobs and I had this Sunday morning coffee clutch. That we'd drink tea, we'd go up in the corner of my property that had a couple of rocks, and we called them our thinking rocks. And Jobs was very much a student of India and the gurus and the Eastern philosophy.
Right.
I was a philosophy minor, engineering major, philosophy minor. That's about as you can get. But anyway, I was well versed in Hegel and Locke and Heidegger and Kant and Sartre, and we used to have these conversations. And a lot, I'd say 70% of the time, it was the difference between Eastern philosophy and Western philosophy. And sort of the whole idea of Buddhism and right thinking and several of the Hindu precepts of the mind, the soul being separate from the mind, and these sorts of things. And so I just wanted to let you know that I'm a little bit aware of that disconnect between Western and Eastern philosophy. So go ahead.
Thank you for sharing that. Because I think that there is an opportunity with what I guess you're doing in the transformation of traditional education to the LearnIP revolution, to some extent, if you want to call it that, where the amalgamation of East and West, which is very important at this point in this juncture in where we are because of geopolitics and the East, West, and digital, the three-sphere debate has come up numerous times on STL, on Straight Talk Live. I think that you're bringing in digital, but there's an East and West element of education that would be absolutely wonderful and amazing. It's not going to happen overnight, but you're probably the best person to do it, where you can blend what we know today that we didn't know 25 years ago. When you were sitting on the rock with Steve Jobs, because I guess, again, he was one of the few who had a viewpoint on Eastern philosophy in an environment where majority understood Western philosophy. But of course, now with India and China and even Japan, and us understanding the two, the thesis of these two different sort of, the yin and yang of the two sides, I think there's an opportunity to create an education system that is way more independent and balanced. I'm not sure how, because we don't know enough about how you're doing this, but we would love to contribute to that as well. And I think many of our straight talkers would love to contribute to that thinking as part of the book or the narrative that you're writing, because it is missing. And everything we see in the West is not conducive. It's not fit for purpose for the 7.5, 8 billion people in the world. But it's good for 2.5, 3 billion of the West. So there is that opportunity that's totally untapped. That I'm sure what you're creating will and can address at some point.
Well, I think that I'm sure that there's a thing I used to always tell my guys. I said, guys, do you know, next year, we're never going to be as horrible as we are right now. And I'd say it sort of tongue in cheek, but I actually meant it. I said, we are really, because my mind always had, well, the artist struggles with his medium. And, if you are dealing with oil paints, you have this idea in your head of what you want to create, and then you start putting the paint down and it smears and it blends and you don't get the color quite right and what have you. And so the paint starts pushing back on you. Right. And many times the technology that you're using pushes back on you. And you end up with something that is an amalgam of what your original idea was and what the outcome is. And sometimes the technology pushes back on you in a positive way, where you end up with something that's better than you originally thought. And so I'm always hopeful that we can have this amalgam of experiences in which we're getting better and better all the time, sometimes quickly, sometimes not so quickly. Sometimes we're going backwards and don't realize it. But at the same time, I think that what happens is that the quest, just another thing, those people who are questing are happier than the people who aren't. They don't think so sometimes, because there's frustration, there's angst, there's all that. But the people who are on Xanax and who are thinking of slitting their wrists and in a darkened apartment, they're not doing anything. They're passively watching. They're not actively thinking. They're not actively solving. They're not questing. The human being is meant to question. If you stop questioning, you get depressed and you get angry, and you basically, well, when I'm giving my entrepreneur speech, I said, I'm going to give you one piece of advice here as an entrepreneur. Don't hire dead people. It always gets a laugh.
You know, one thing you're referring to, I studied psychology, and Eric Erickson talks about the stages of life, and the very final stage is generativity versus stagnation.
Yeah.
And that's the negotiation we have to all go through. And I could look back, I could look at my parents' generation, and some of them chose stagnation. Some of them choose generativity, where they're wanting to keep challenging themselves and learn and grow. And I just really get that about you, Nolan Bushnell. At the stage you're at in your life, you're just as hungry as I would imagine you would have been 20 something, 30 something, where you're still curious as can be and trying to find the best ways to contribute to life and to society. And I just want to say, I really appreciate how you continue to show up for not just yourself, but greater than yourself, to the greater good.
Yeah.
And that's just really obvious with your passion. That's never waned. And it's inspiring. And I wish there were more elders, like real elders in different communities like you, that could help bring that generativity from all that you come from.
Well, thank you. It's funny when you use the word elder. I don't think of myself as an elder, but I guess I am.
Yeah, and I mean that in almost like in the spiritual sense, like an elder, like a Native American elder or what have you. Yeah. But you're an elder. You're a wisdom holder in the ways that you hold wisdom and experience, right?
Well, I feel like I'm a 14-year-old trapped in an adult's body.
Well, there's that too, right? There's that side too. That's
what
keeps you fun.
I think there's one more thing I want to say, Nolan, and I think it goes down for you. This is the second time you've come on our show, and we don't take anything for granted. And I must say that for some reason, Rick and I have been interviewing, for some reason, don't know why, interviewing a lot of folks who are who are more experienced. Let's put it that way, not older, but more experienced. Many who have who are wisdom holders. And there's one common theme, two or three, but one major common theme. One is this energy, this drive for activity, to solve problems, to keep this moving and charged up. And you described that beautifully, which you have. The second thing we've noticed is humility. Because there has been a good 20 or 30 years where, because of economic situations and the rise of this and the rise of that, there's been a lot of ego that we people have experienced. Selling into big companies, you see a senior leader who's massively egotistical, a hedge fund manager, a business owner who give business the wrong face. And I think what's amazing about you don't have to come to our show. Let's be honest. I'm sure you're busy doing 1,000 other things. And you certainly, and we don't, this is not for profit. There's no money exchanged, not that you need any of it. But you keep coming, and many people have again and again, and we are deeply grateful. And what we're learning is generosity, giving, listening, openness, and humility. And we've stopped teaching that. We've stopped discussing those things. Religion used to teach that, but religion's pretty much dead and gone, in the West at least. And parents are clueless themselves. So thank you for that too. We're genuine, because who knows when we'll talk a bit again. I'm sure we will, and be involved and learn it. But you are a true inspiration. We're not just saying it because of who you are, but it does make a real material difference. At least Rick and I, you've changed two people, that's for sure.
Well, thank you. Well, I try not to live my life in the rearview mirror, and I don't know what that means to a lot of people, but people ask me what I'm proud of, and I always say the next thing I'm working on.
Right.
Yeah, that's amazing. Before we go, we're about to run out of time. We have an interesting question that I think we have to pose and throw it at you. So it's from Facebook, actually. So the question from Facebook is: as a kid, I was addicted to Tetris to the point that literally any time I closed my eyes, I would see blocks falling. Do you know what is going on in the brain to cause this, and to what extent will the games you're currently developing have the same effect on my kids?
Well, what happens is you have a Tetris, first of all, is a really brilliant game. I don't know if you noticed.
Yeah, we saw that.
Oh yeah.
And what we do is, if we get very, very focused on a particular game, particular picture, particular thing, we are an engine that keeps filing away systems,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and the hindbrain is very, very special and actually quite unpredictable and uncontrollable.
Mm-hmm.
And it does stuff, you know, in our dreams where we're filing stuff, but I do know this, that my hindbrain can solve problems that my forebrain can't or won't. And that's why monumental decisions I always like to sleep on.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. That's when the subconscious can kick in and
Right.
you get that deeper reservoir of wisdom and intuition.
Well, I think the hindbrain can handle 20 or 30 variables, whereas the forebrain handles 7. You know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Brilliant. So we've come to the end. From my side, I'll let Rick finish off. A wonderful session again with you, Nolan. We're very excited about Learn It. We would want to promote it. We believe in transformation of education. We are frustrated with the way people are being taught. It's about timing, that something happens and something happens quickly. So you have all our support. Our entire community of thousands of Straight Talkers will use the app if it's available. And whenever you launch it, think of us. And thank you from my side. I look forward to connecting with you very, very soon. But Rick, over to you, buddy, to close the proceedings.
Yeah, just lastly, once again, thank you so much for your time, your passion, your impact over all these years. Very much.
Final, commercial. Go to Learn It, not in as LEARN, learn, but as in turnip, TUR. Learn It, the turnip. That's our model. But go to the Learn It website, LERNIP, and sign up for the book chapter. Mm-hmm. And you will become one of our, mentored guests. And we want to get thousands signed up before we actually launch.
Wonderful. Yeah. So we're going to promote that on our speaker page as well. So on your profiles on our speaker page on our straighttalklive.com, straighttalk.live, we'll have your specific profile, and we'll have the LearnUp URL there too. And any other links you want to send that to us, and we'll make sure we get that on there as well for our listeners.
I appreciate it. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you so much for your time again. You're fantastic. All the best to you, Nolan. And then really quickly, next week, we're going to be talking to George Calhoun, amazing writer, finance, just entrepreneur. And then we're going to be talking about China specifically and what's actually happening in the technology space in China. Everything from what happened to Jack Ma to what's going on with crypto and all these fascinating things that he's on top of in a way that most people are not. So it's going to be a fascinating conversation next week. Nolan, please tune in, and we hope to see you all soon.
Okay.
Okay. Be well, everyone.
Thank you very much. Be well. All the best.
Cheers.